Welcome to the tutorial for the Nutley Jacket. We're going to start by doing the front panel seams. So this is my front and my side front. Yours will be marked more clearly, mine's a PDF printout. And these are the notches, and this is the pocket placement for the different sizes. So, oh, and that's the fold line. So that one is for a lining if you wanted to line it, but we're not doing that today. So that fold line would be the one you'd want to mark. I've put my safety pins in, as this fabric is loosely woven, so I'd lose my notches very easily, and I thought it would show up more than doing tailor tacks and threads. So you can see I've popped little safety pins in. It also helps with right side, wrong side identification in this case too. And you can see I've pre-overlocked everything because it's very loosely woven. It's beautiful, it's a wool, but as you can see, it's quite a loose weave, and it is going to fray any second. So I've left the tops unoverlocked, partly so that I know where the top is, so that's quick and easy identification, but also because that's going to be enclosed in the yoke, so it doesn't need to be overlocked. So starting at the top, I am going to pin downwards towards the hem, matching these safety pins which are in place of my notches. I've actually managed to do a bit of a cracking pattern match on this, so I can use my pattern on there as much as I need the notches. I'm going to stitch from the top down to the bottom, back tack to start, keeping those edges together. Another nice finish for these seams would be if you wanted to bind them. I did consider it, but I just didn't have time, unfortunately, this time. But overlocking is certainly good enough. So centimetre seam allowance, stitching from the top to the hem. There you go, I'm using an orange thread, so hopefully that shows up nicely. There we go. I'm going to press this seam open. So that's the seam that goes over the bust. Pressed open, and you can see I've still got my safety pins for my pocket placement on there. Next we're going to do the side back seams. So I've got my centre back panel that's cut on the fold. These are the notches that you need to mark. There's one sort of at the waist as well. And this is my side front, so you want, again, your double notches to match up. And I've again overlocked the edges but left the tops unoverlocked so that I can identify the top easily. The centre back panel, it will be confusing if you don't clearly mark which is top and which is bottom. So matching up those safety pins again. Pinning my seam. Let's take those safety pins out so don't sew over them. Starting at the top, stitch towards the hem. There we are, centimetre seam allowance, beautiful orange thread. And I'm going to press that open again. There we are, neatly pressed. Repeat for the other side back. So next we're going to put the back yoke on. That's my back panels that I've just put together. This is my back yoke cut to the fold. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in to mark my notches. I'm not going to do double pins because I know this is my back, because it's going to be attached to my back panel now. So I'm just marking the lowest notch. If you're using a twill or a gabardine or something, then obviously you can just put your little snips in to mark your notches, much easier to see. So I'm pinning these together. On your back yoke you'll have a notch where the seam is on each side. Stitch across 1 centimetre seam allowance. There we go. There's my seam. I don't need to press it yet. Okay, so next we're going to do the pocket flaps, which are of course optional, as are the patch pockets. Now, I've cut one version out of my wool and another version out of my lining fabric that I'm using, mainly again because it's more densely woven than my wool and it's not as bulky. So it's really just to kind of give it a bit of stability. I didn't really want to put any interfacing on this wool because it's so lovely and soft. So a centimetre seam allowance around the edges again, and I'm going to leave my needle in and turn and pivot. Sorry, my fingers are in the way. If you were making these pocket flaps out of, again, a denim or a linen or something like that, I would probably put a very light interfacing on one side of the flap, just to keep its crispness, really. So needle in, pivot your fabric, keep the edges together. There we go. You can see that orange thread nicely. So I'm just going to trim down a little bit. Again, not too much because of the loose weave of this fabric. If it were, again, a twill or cotton or something, I would trim it down a little bit more. I don't want any frayed edges coming out. So giving it a little wiggle into the points, again, because I don't want to loosen anything up. I'll give that a little press now. There we go, nicely pressed. And I'm just going to stitch a stay stitch along the top here. So slightly longer stitch length just to hold it together. Just makes it a bit easier when you attach it to the yoke. Okay, so we'll attach the pocket flaps now to the front yokes. This is my front yoke. Again, you can see I've overlooked all around the edges because of the fraying and things. Now, finding the middle of my pocket flap, and you'll have a notch on your pattern for the yoke. You can see I matched the pattern, so I know where it needs to go. So I didn't bother with the notches, which is very naughty, but, you know, kind of self-explanatory. So I'm just going to stay stitch that onto there now. There we go, nice bit of pattern matching. Okay, we're going to join the shoulder seams next. So there's my back panel. Incidentally, if you haven't pre-overlocked around your neckline, you might want to put a stay stitch in or something, or a little bit of interfacing so that it doesn't stretch or distort. So shoulder seams together, right sides together, pinning from the neckline to the shoulder. And again, stitching from the neckline out towards the shoulder. There we go, that's attached. Press those seams open. So now I'm going to construct my yoke lining. Now, it doesn't have to be made of lining fabric. It could be a cotton or something, or the same fabric that you've used for the outside. But as before, I've explained, that's the lining line that you want to cut to there. To show you, it's sort of self-facing, so it will bag itself out there. And the back yoke again is on the fold. So yeah, if you were making in a denim or something, you could either use the denim or you could use a really nice Liberty print cotton lawn or poplin or something, or raid your scraps for just a little piece of cotton that you've got. Makes it a bit less slippy. So pinning the shoulders together, stitching again from the neckline out towards the shoulder. Here we go, centimetre seam allowance, right sides together as always, and then we're going to press this seam open. Now we're going to stitch the neckline. So I've got my jacket there, my outer jacket that I've constructed so far. That's my neckline there. And then I've got the yoke that I've just made out of the lining. I'm going to start by joining these front sections. So right sides together, centimetre seam allowance, back tack to start and stop. So do that both sides. There you go. You can see that lovely thread again. And now because it's self-facing, it will fold itself over the right amount, but we're going to pin these shoulder seams first. So right sides together again. Find the shoulder seams of both yokes and pin through the centre. That's one. And that's the other one. And then pop another pin in, sort of centre back-ish. There we go. As they lay on top of each other, you should see. If you've been careful, there won't be any stretching. There we go. So a little pin there. And as you can see now, ever so gently, if you just lay them on top of each other, they should match exactly. Obviously, if you're using a cotton or something, you will have transferred the notches on the neckline. So you'll see that that seam at the front there will match up with the notch on your yoke. So pop a couple more pins in. And that just makes it a little bit self-facing, which is nice. It just reduces a little bit of the bulk that would be there otherwise. So a centimetre seam allowance all the way around. Here we go. Take your time with this so that you're not stretching or distorting it. So it forms such a lovely clean neckline. There we go. Oh, lots of threads that need trimming off there. I'll do that in a minute. And there we go. Definitely a good choice to use the orange thread. So that's stitched all the way around. Now I'm just going to trim some of these threads off and I'm going to snip into the seam allowance. Again, if you were using a denim or something a little bit heavier, you might want to grade this seam, but because of the loose weave, again, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm just trimming down these little corner bits. So 1.5, 2 centimetres, depending on how tight the curve is, just to clip into that seam. Careful you don't cut your stitch line. And then we're going to turn it through. Just enough that we can then get in there and do some understitching. Always makes a neckline look so nice. So I'm going to be stitching just on the edge of this lining fabric. So seam allowance pointing that way and lay your lining over the top, and you're going to stitch through that lining there of your yoke and the seam allowance. So you're stitching your seam allowance to your yoke as close to the edge or as close to the seam line as you can without going over. Again, it's worth taking a little bit of care over this part. There we are. Already it's starting to lay flatter. I'll show you that a bit more closely so you can see where my stitch line is. Okay, so I'm just going to give that a nice press now. Lovely. It's already looking quite crisp. It's from the right side, a nice shape. Next job is the centre fronts. We're going to create a button stand and a buttonhole stand, or popper stand, whichever sort of closure you want. Now I've put a little rectangle of interfacing in there. I just wanted to show you, and it is just that rectangle that I pointed out on the other side, and I've done the same here. I've cut a strip. It's just very light, just to give it a little bit of stability again, because otherwise the buttonholes will pull out. So it's this width up to your fold line, and then just place it 1 centimetre away from the edge, and it doesn't need to be really thick or hard interfacing. Mine's very soft. So we're going to create now a button stand out of this, it's a self-facing basically. So I'm using the pattern again, and I'm going to mark with some pins. That's my fold line. And then this notch here, not the lining line, but the notch there, that is where it will fold to. So when I fold back my centimetre seam allowance and fold it on my fold line, the folded edge should then match up with that notch on the left there at the top. That's it, this one here. So popping some pins in, because I'm going to bag out the bottom corner first, just so that it's nice and neat at the bottom. So you want to sort of fold it back how it's going to be, and then sort of fold it back on itself so you've got right sides together, so we can bag out this little corner here. Okay, so I'm matching that fold line to that pin, which was where that notch was, and I folded back my seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch now along the bottom. Your seam allowance will be whatever you've determined the length of your jacket is, plus whatever your hem you've allowed. I'm using 1.5 centimetres here, which is a nice amount. And then I'm going to just trim this corner and grade it down a little bit so it's not too bulky. There we go. And turn it through. So then you've got your little bagged out corner and your self-facing, which is going to make your button or buttonhole stand, depending which side it is you're doing. So now I'm going to fold back this centimetre seam allowance and give it a press. There we go. And then I'm going to fold the main part of the facing and pin as I go. You might want to measure it as you go. Make sure it's nice and even. And again, you want to match your notches at the top and the bottom. There we go. Keep it even all the way down. I'm going to give that a press again now because it's quite bouncy, this wool. There we go. Make it easier to stitch now. So I'm just going to stitch right on the edge. Again, if you're using a plain fabric, you might want to get fancy with some top stitching or something, I don't know, but or even some braid or something. But I'm just going to stitch it down as it's busy enough already. So there we are, one button stand. Okay, so let's attach the front of our jacket now to our yokes. So obviously you've got two sides. Let's focus on this side for now. You can see there's my facing inside. This is my right side up. And this is my front yoke with my pocket flap. So I place my pocket flap upwards and I'm placing right sides together, but that's the wrong side of my pocket flap against the right side of my jacket front. And I'm going to pin, again, you have a notch where that seam goes. It's the centre of your pocket flap. And I'm pinning from the armhole towards the button stand. There we go. Put them in. Okay. So I'm going to stitch 1 centimetre across from the armhole to the button stand. There we go. So that's the front attached to the outer yoke. There we go. Let me show you. Look. That's how it should look. The next step is to sort of wrap this lining bit and that last little bit of outer yoke around over where you've just stitched. and wrap it quite snugly at the centre front there. Pop some pins in, and this is going to bag out that yoke for you. Okay, so again, there's my little notch that goes to the seam. Pop a pin in and then match my underarms there. So you've made not quite a burrito, more of a sort of sandwich or something. So stitching from the centre front towards the armhole this time. Centimetre seam allowance, you're basically stitching over the stitch line you've already done. But this will attach the lining to the yoke at the bottom, and it'll all bag out nice and cleanly and look very smart from the inside. So there's my seam line. Let's turn it through and have a look. There we go. So it's all nicely bagged out. I'm going to give it a press first. There we go. So next is the back yoke. We're going to bag this out using the burrito method. So this is a full-on burrito. Let's have a look at my front button stands first. That's how they should look. It's all nice. And here we go. So lay it out like this, wrong side up, and then you want to fold the bottom of your jacket up into your yoke, and then turn the yoke lining so that it is wrong side towards the table, and you've got the wrong side of your top yoke towards you. So I'm now pinning between my armholes, and again you should have some notches on your yoke. I've got them on my yoke lining which match up with your seams. There we go, there's one, and there's my seam. Okay, keep pinning, match that seam to that notch. One more pin. Okay, I'm going to stitch between my armholes now. Centimetre seam allowance, it should again be on the same stitch line that you've already done. And then I'm going to turn it through. This is where the magic happens. So pull it all out of the yoke. Oh, get that last bit. There we go. Ta-da! There we are, all bagged out beautifully. Just needs a press now. Snip that straggler. So there we are. Back yoke bagged out, pressed, beautiful. All I'm going to do now is match these shoulder seams of the inner and outer yokes and give it a stay stitch to the lining, because it just stops it moving around. When you're popping those sleeves in, you just want it all like one fabric. So there we go, just within the seam allowance, just to hold it all together. Now it's pocket prep time. Nice little patch pockets, cut one pair. There's a fold line there to mark. I've put a pin in so that I know which is the right side of my fabric. And I'm just going to stitch down the sides a centimetre and bag these little corners out just because it looks a little bit neater. The challenge with the bias obviously is trying not to stretch and distort it, so ever so gently turning it through. I can take that pin out now because it's obvious which is the right side. And I'm going to press all my seam allowances back. So there we go. You can see the top of the pocket and the centimetre seam allowance around the rest. I'm going to give that a little stitch down. There we go. One patch pocket. Applying the pockets. Obviously these are optional, but it's quite nice to have a little patch pocket. Now there are my safety pins where I'd marked my pocket placement earlier. Now there's my pocket. I'm going to place that in line with those, and you want to make sure this is parallel here, parallel to the centre front. So I'm going to start pinning there. It really shows with this fabric too if it's square or not, so have to be super careful. And then you want to make sure it's parallel to the hem as well, not too squiffy. There we go, that's on nice and squarely. Lots and lots of pins as it's very wobbly, as it's that loose weaving on the cross. And then I'm just going to stitch round once on these. Again, plain fabric, you could really go for it with a nice bit of fancy top stitch, but I think this is busy enough. Stitching down from the top, needle in, pivot, again keeping hold of that so it doesn't shift too much, keeping it square with the hem, and then up the final side, finishing with a back tack. There we go. Look at all those pins, and I don't use pins, so there we go. Looking very smart. Now a nice quick job, which is the side seams. So I've got both my pockets on. Right sides together, side back to side front. Again, match any notches. Pop some pins in. Starting from under the arm, work your way down. Centimetre seam allowance. There we go, press that open. Lovely. Next is constructing the sleeves. This is a lovely two-piece sleeve. I love a two-piece sleeve, especially on a jacket. I think it looks very smart. So you need a pair of your undersleeve and a pair of your top sleeve. I've got a vent on the bottom of this one. I mean, if you don't want the vent, obviously just fold that bit back and just cut it like a plain two-piece sleeve. You don't have to do that. So you've got notches to match. These ones, balance marks, and this one's very important. That matches your side seam. Got your lengthen and shorten lines on there too. So we've all got different length arms, haven't we? So you can see I've put my safety pins on again to mark as many notches as possible. So I'm taking one of each. Lots of stragglers there. So let's match this bit first. So pinning from the top all the way down, matching any notches as you go, and then the inside seam. Pin from the top down. Lovely. Just going to pop a little pin in that vent bit there. So that's where you'll finish stitching there. So you start from the top, come down, pivot, and then stitch that last little top bit of the vent. Centimetre seam allowance open it up and give it a press. There we are. Nicely pressed. I've put a little snip in there. I'll show you a close-up of that in a minute, just so that that vent can fold over. There you go, look, just opens it up a little bit. Let's put these sleeves in. So there's my jacket, and this is my sleeve. It's my right hand sleeve because I've got a double safety pin, so I know that's the back of my sleeve head there. So from the inside of my jacket, I'm going to match this pin, which was the notch on the pattern I said very important, because that matches your underarm seam. I'm going to take these pins out. I'm worried I'm going to stitch over them. So that's one really important pin in. The next one is the sleeve head. So again, match that to the seam. I'm going to take that one out as well. So match to the shoulder seam. Pop a pin in. And then we're going to pin a little bit under the arm before matching those notches there. Okay, so a little bit under the arm here. Going ever so carefully because I don't want it to fray, it'll just disintegrate this fabric. So, like I say, I'm going to take this pin out, but match it to my notch on my yoke. That's it. Pin in, and then there's a little bit of ease at the top of the sleeve, which is really lovely when it's stitched. If you have any problems with a sleeve head ever, just put a big stitch in a centimetre seam allowance, or whatever the seam allowance is, away from the raw edge, just around the sleeve head, and just pull it up ever so slightly, and it will just help to ease that extra in without leaving any sort of tucks or ruckles in there. There we go, that's all in nicely. So make sure I've got plenty of pins in. Stitching from the inside, I start under the arm. I'm going to go all the way round. So centimetre seam allowance as always. Here, taking my time to ease anything in that needs easing. Okay, that's all stitched in. So taking all the pins out, let's have a look on the outside. Make sure again there's no tucks or anything untoward going on. That looks great. Happy with that. So now I'm going to overlock around the inside. Again, if you had the time and the patience, it would look lovely bound. So there we go, one sleeve in. Now I'm going to do the hem. So again, because I've got this loosely woven wool that's beautiful, very, very soft, I've got this bias binding here. Doesn't have to be bias, it could be straight. And I'm going to pin it to my hem and then stitch it on, and then I'll turn it up and I will hand stitch it. So I think the tape, well, apart from making it look ever so lush and a bit more expensive, I think it will just give it a nice finish and a little bit of stability around the hem that perhaps it wouldn't have otherwise. So that's going to look quite nice. If you're using a machine and you just want to turn and do a hem and stitch, that's great. That would work really well on any cottons. So let's stitch this with the machine first. So it's a double fold bias that I'm using, just what I had in the drawer. Again, if you were using a plain fabric and you wanted to bind everything, a really pretty sort of Liberty print or something would be lovely, or a contrast colour. So that's the first stitch line done. I'm going to fold that upwards and I'm just going to start pinning it to my jacket. There we go. Anchor it down at the seam lines. That's where it's strongest. And then give it a little fold. Fold in neatly where it meets the facing at the bottom and pop another pin in. There we go. So I'm off for a cup of tea and a little bit of hand sewing. There we go. That's all hand stitched down now. Just needs a press. Lovely. Oh, that looks really nice. I'm really pleased with that. And I'm happy I used that colour too. I think that looks very smart. Next job is finishing the cuffs. Now, if you've not done the vent, you can literally just turn it up or turn and stitch it down. But I'm going to show you how I do the vent. Okay, so let's lay this nicely. You can see it folds back towards the top. This is my right sleeve. So I want to make sure this bit folds back the same amount as there is on my pattern. Oops. So fold it back and you'll see you should have about 3 centimetres there. I'm going to pop a pin in there again because I can't notch things on this fabric very well, so I know where that notch would be. So then you're just going to bag that little corner out. Just fold it back on that line. And there's a 2 centimetre hem on this, so I'm just going to stitch across a couple of centimetres up. This is why I always do the cuffs last, because I like to try my jacket on and make sure the sleeves are the right length before I hem. So there you go, look, you can see there's the 2 centimetre. You'll have a notch on yours. And then I'm just going to trim this down a little bit. Oh, blunt scissors. Let's go about this the other way. There we go. Just debulked it a little bit. Cut that little straggler off and turn it through. There we go. That looks good. Incidentally, I'm using this as a faux opening, but if you wanted to put buttons and buttonholes on it, then you would need to pop a little bit of interfacing onto that vent piece that folds in. But because mine are just going to be stitched through, I'm just leaving it nice and soft. Okay, so I'm going to bind this hem again because I really liked it on the hem, so I'm going to do that for the cuff as well. I think it's worth taking that little bit of extra time. So I'll be using the same principle. Oh, and I just want to bag this corner out as well, actually, while I think about it. I think it'll look nicer. So again, fold it back and just stitching. I'm literally just going to use the overlocking as the hem. Doesn't want to be too much, but it'll just look a little bit smarter at the cuff. There we go, that's better. Check that that top part of the cuff is the same length or ever so slightly longer than the under bit. And then I'm going to pin some of this on and whip round it with the sewing machine like I did with the hem. There we go, that's on. So then it's just pinning it up again as we did before, and I'm going to hand stitch that with a little whip stitch, which doesn't take long at all. The cuffs are tiny. tuck that last bit in. There you go. Little hand stitch coming up. Oh yeah, you see, again, it looks nice. I'm happy I did that. That's great. Give it a press. There we go. One sleeve vent. So all that's left now is buttons and buttonholes. Unless you're using poppers, then it's poppers. But I'm going to show you the buttonholes. I've done more in-depth tutorials on how I do this on my ride jacket because this isn't a beginner pattern. I'm just going to roughly show you what I'm going to do. Measure down the centre front. It's about 51, 52 centimetres. So I'm going to put a pin in here, and then I'm thinking probably 5 buttons, space them at 10 centimetres. Let's try that, see what that looks like. So pin in every 10 centimetres, having established where I want that top one. So it's the top one that you want to have a look at and decide where you want it to be. If you've got a larger bust, you may need to try your jacket on and make sure there's a button over your bust. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, brilliant. That's what I've got. I think that'll do. I've obviously practiced doing this on lots of scraps first, and I suggest you do the same. I've got a bit of paper underneath my fabric here just to aid it going through because it's quite a chunky knit. Otherwise, you just have to look at your sewing machine manual and any tutorials online with regards how to use your buttonhole facility. They're all so different. So now I'm just lining up these centre fronts here. That fold is next to the stitch line, and I'm just putting a pin through where my button is going to lie, where the button shank comes. There's a shank on these buttons, look. There, you can just see that. So that's where I will stitch it. So I find that the easiest way to do it to make sure they line up exactly. So just do the same for all the other buttonholes. And there you go. You can see those are real, those are not. They're literally just holding the flaps down, and these ones are loose so that you can get your hands in the pockets. And 3 on the vent there. So hopefully your jacket looks like this. Enjoy.